Everybody, Colin Stevenson here, joined by my hero, John Lenhart. Hi, John.
Hi.
Now, John, this is quite emotional today. This is our second last ever recording of your story. How you know what you know, where you came from. Now, today, I believe is going to it'll probably trigger people slightly, because if they find out how they've been reading a certain book of faith wrongly for this whole time, there's going to be conflict there within their mind and their body, So today, you're going to tell us how to read the Bible properly, aren't you?
Right. So if you remember, I talked about Isaac Newton. I
Yep.
said he was the most famous person I felt closest to. He spent all his time writing about two topics more than anything else. One was alchemy, which is formulation, and we covered my background in formulation. The other one was about the Bible, because he intuitively knew there were answers in that book, but he knew something wasn't getting interpreted right. So he spent a lot of time going, what is the real interpretation of this book? Because if you had it, you would have all this information. I've been doing some things. I've been reading the Bible and doing some things. However, in the last 3 to 4 months, I met a guy named Peter, and he introduced me to this book called How to Read a Book. I was shocked. I had never heard of this book. He said this was his favorite book. He reads it once every year. And a lot of people who would get a classical education, they read this book, because so much of the education is they're going to read the classics, and there is a way to read the book. In fact, this book says there are 4 ways to read a book.
Wow.
And those 4 ways correspond to the 4 thought processes. So there is a 360 or a 320 way to read the book. There is a 160 way to read a book. There's an 80, which most people know about. And then there's a 10. There are 4 different ways to read the book, and it perfectly corresponds to the 4 thought processes.
Yep.
So what I want to do is I want to talk about what this book says about how to read a book, and it will lead into the Bible. So the biggest 2 things this book says is, number 1, if you are going to disagree with a book or you're going to explain a book, the number 1 thing you need to do is read the entire book. Okay. I mean, that seems obvious, but here's the thing. Don't read a secondary work. Read the work. Read the book. Don't read what somebody else says about the book. Read that book. The second step is if you're going to disagree with it, you need to write a defense for the author. We've called it contrastive thinking. You need to look at that book and say, how could the author be right, to show that you understand them. You have to first have understanding before you have agreement or disagreement. And there are 4 levels. You can read a book and you can say, in my opinion, I don't agree with this. And that's just your opinion. That's fine.
Yep.
You can qualify it. You can say, I think or I believe this book is wrong. We know the communication guidelines. That's okay. If you're going to say the book is wrong, you have to explain the right answer. And he does a lot of, in the book, he does a lot of explanation about this. And he says, actually, you get this from arguing techniques.
Yep.
You cannot say, I know you're wrong, Colin, but I don't know the right answer. You cannot do that. The 4th level, and we talked about this with my story the last 2 episodes, is to say something's heretical. You can't say something's heretical unless you say, because you're not just saying it's wrong, you're saying it's wrong and it's got devastating effects.
Yep.
You have to be able to say what's the right answer. So if you notice it, in the last 2 episodes, we talked about my book, Modeling God, and how all these pastors, kind of joined together to just bully me.
Yep.
Well, now I know from this book, those pastors didn't know how to read a book.
Yep.
They didn't read my book. They read another pastor's writing about my book, and none of them wrote a defense. The one pastor who read the book wrote a refutation. He wrote the opposite of a defense for me. So this book, How to Read a Book, shows in the previous 2 episodes, none of these pastors know how to read a book, which means they don't know how to read the Bible.
Which was the words that I was just about to say. They have got this book that they swear by, live by, and preach and teach about that they don't understand. Now, that is a very, 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 very it's beyond anything. You know, you can't teach something that unless you know the truth about. You know, and if you can't see the truth, it means you can't teach the truth.
Right. And the thing is my book is easier to interpret than the Bible, and they couldn't interpret my book. That right there was proof they shouldn't have been going anywhere near a Bible. Now, I love to deal with people who think they're geniuses.
Yep.
These college professors, these famous people. And whenever any of them quotes from the Bible and tries to tell us what it means, I like to remind them the way to interpret the Bible, when you interpret the Bible, you are showing your ability to interpret text.
Yep.
If you can't interpret the text correctly of the Bible, you're showing you shouldn't be listened to for anything. And I'll give you an example. Jordan Peterson was on a show and he said the Bible is not good. It's not compelling literature. And he started teaching the story of Cain and Abel. Well, in the story, he says Cain sinned when by the gift he gave. In the Bible, if you read it, just reading text, just reading a story, God actually tells Cain he didn't sin yet. He says sin is crouching at your door. In the story, Abel gave something more than what was expected, and God gave him back, or respect, the difference. Cain gave exactly what was required, and he didn't get anything back. He got upset. That'd be like me giving you $40 when I only owed you 20. You'd give me 20 back. Somebody else gave you 20 and go, where's my 20, Colin? You just gave me 20. That's all that's being said. Jordan Peterson can't even interpret this small passage as a story. He has demonstrated his inability to interpret text. And so that's why I warn anybody, the minute you go near the Bible, can you read that? Now, we saw with those other pastors, there's a bigger issue, is that the minute you start attacking, I'm 2 to 3 questions away from those people losing their salvation. So I don't want to interact with anybody, any religious people. I don't want to. There's 3 churches I go to because I'm essentially a member of those 3 churches. I don't want to walk in any church I'm not a member. I don't want to put anybody in trouble. And in the Bible, Jesus and Paul both stopped dealing with the religious people when they realized their questions was taking these people out of salvation. So that's the point I want to make here, is that anybody in the world who tries to tell you what the Bible is saying, if they're wrong, they just lost all their credibility in every other book and every other example where they're trying to interpret text. Now, in How to Read a Book, they say, it's on page 288, that the most difficult book to read is the Bible. And the reason why it's difficult is they say any book that you have to read, and they use the word orthodox. Orthodox means right meaning. The problem with reading the Bible, they said, is when you read it, if you don't get the right meaning, then you're going to go to hell. Then all these catastrophic things happen. And so they actually say in the book, we're going to stop here. And they say they don't want to explain how to read the Bible because it's so difficult to try to read it in a way where you have to have the exact right message. Now, I told you Newton wrote the Principia. It had all this information from physics, and within 10 years, it was out of print, and people asked him to write another book. Modeling God is out of print. It went out of print in less than 10 years. And the whole point of that book, the whole point of this book, was to help you be able to understand the Bible more clearly so that you'd be able to hear from God more clearly and more often. So that's what I end up asking people is how do you read the Bible, if you're going to say that what I was trying to do to help people is wrong, what's your answer to do it? And how do you do it? Because it's an unconscious confrontation to them that they're saying something's wrong, but they don't have an answer.
Now this happens, and it happens in most walks and ways of life, to be honest. But when if we're looking at source, we're looking at God, we're looking at, where we came from, or the writing, where the writing came from, and we've only been here for 30, 40, 50 years, whatever. Everything, all this was written a long, long time ago. So, and how it was written and how it's read are two different things. Everybody's got their own perspective. Now, you can model anything. So if you're saying if you model it this way and read it this way, then do it your way. What you're saying is everyone's going to get the same interpretation by reading it their own way.
Right. Well, here's the funny thing, is this book actually does explain how to read the Bible, and it doesn't know it. This book is a truth savant. And this is what I do, Colin.
Yeah.
I talk to people. I love to coach truth savants, people who know and feel the truth, but they can't put it into words. This book actually explained it. And let me show you what it says in the book. The first thing it says is because what is the Bible? The Bible, if you're going to read it, and they actually say, if you don't read the Bible as literature, then you're going to have all these issues. So they actually said that, but more importantly, they have all these categories listed. The Bible would fit under the category of history. It's history. You're reading history. That's what you're reading. You're reading a story about history. And in How to Read a Book, they say the way to read history is to look at the last 5 letters of history. Story. They say read history as if it's a story and you don't care if it's right or wrong.
Yes.
Because everybody's history is biased. So they say in this book, read history as if it's a story. So here's the 2 points I love to illustrate about reading stories. So read it as literature. Just read it as a story.
Yep.
What would you think of somebody who reads Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings? They read one chapter and they close it up and they go, this could never happen.
Well, again, there's no truth in that. They've literally been triggered, and what they do is they let it go.
Right. So the first rule of reading the Bible or reading history and reading a story is just believe it.
Take it for what it is.
Take it for what it is,
yeah.
And stop trying to figure out how it works or doesn't work, whether it's real or not. Just read it. Just read it. The second thing I like to say is, what would you think if they read like Lord of the Rings and they go, well, I think the way Frodo got from here to there was he took a spaceship. You'd go, well, you can't bring stuff from outside this book to make the book make sense. So if you just read the Bible as if it is a story, just take it for what it is and don't bring anything outside. You read about this character, God, Jehovah, Yahweh, and you go, well, he is, wait, where are you getting that from? Are you getting it from somewhere outside of this book? Just look at what's in it. Remember, when I solved that 1 in a million problem, I said, we can't have any preconceived notions about solving this 1 in a million problem. And everybody quit. 49 people quit after 2 weeks because all the preconceived notions said this isn't solvable. I didn't have any preconceived notions. And 3 weeks a day, I solved it. Now, here's the problem. Is what I'm saying heretical? Like, if I just read the Bible as a story, don't bring anything from the outside in, and just take it as what it is, how do people feel about that? Because I think there are people out going, why would you? That's wrong. You can't read it like that. That's bad. That's why I don't think a lot of people have read it this way.
And I understand what you're saying, but you like to have the no preconceived thoughts before you go into anything, because when you do, that's what stops us doing. Now, if I just relate the Bible to life at the moment, everyone's got a preconceived thought process as to how they live their life. Now, if the Bible is explaining to people who are Christians that they want to live their life a certain way, what it's saying first, before you open this book, do not have a preconceived way of reading, and then you can live your life according to what we're saying. But if people, and the 90, well, we said 96%, I believe it might be even more than that, people have a preconception of everything and they don't trust. And the lack of trust means that they have lack of truth, they have lack of knowledge, lack of understanding, or lack of ability to let go is not allowing them to really feel.
Right. And I say to people, the hardest part about reading the Bible is to really put yourself in the place that I'm reading Harry Potter, I'm reading Lord of the Rings, I'm reading that. Now, there's the final issue with reading the Bible that How to Read a Book actually addresses, but doesn't realize it addresses. And this is something you brought up a couple of episodes ago. So I'm going to bring this up. There is a difference between a puzzle and a mystery. A puzzle is an issue that has a finite number of solutions. And then as you get more information, the number of solutions decrease down to the right answer. That's the way a puzzle works. A mystery has a finite number of solutions. And as you get more information, the number of possible solutions grows until you get all the information, and then it's one. So if you think of murder mysteries, it starts off and you think you know who it could be. And then as you get more information, you're going, there's more possibilities. And then at the end, boom, 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 everything's there. I like to say episodes of House, the TV show. Every one of those episodes was a mystery, but what they did was they presented it as a puzzle. They led you to believe that as they did more tests and eliminated, they'd get down to the one answer and that would be it. And they usually spend half the show doing that. And then another symptom pops up and everybody goes, what? It was never a puzzle.
Scooby-Doo used to do the exact same thing.
What's that?
Scooby-Doo.
Scooby-Doo, all those mysteries, right? Sherlock Holmes, all those mysteries, Scooby-Doo, they're all like that. They're like, well, there's all these possibilities. That's what a mystery is.
Yeah.
A puzzle, you narrow it down. A puzzle, you can use analysis on it, and you can get down to one answer. The Bible says it's a mystery. It uses the word mystery in there. So if you approach the Bible as a puzzle, what's going to happen with the number of possible answers?
Well, you're going to have to work through them. And then you might go the wrong way, so you might not get the right answer by the end of it. Or you might not even be able to funnel it in.
But how many possible answers, are they going to be less or more over time?
Oh, it's going to be more.
So how many religions are there off of the Bible?
Oh, for goodness sake, are they not all off of the Bible?
That's why. So you brought that up in another one. Why are there all these? The reason why is the Bible's a mystery. And until you have all the answers, all of these look right. Because basically everybody's saying, well, nobody has the right answer. So how can you say that's wrong? Well, you have this contradiction. Yeah, but you have this contradiction. That's why all of these denominations and all of these religions have grown, is because it's a mystery, not a puzzle, but we treat it like a puzzle.
Yeah.
We're not going to have an answer until we have all the information. So that's the issue there. That's why all these religions have grown. It's very simple. It's a mystery, not a puzzle. So how are you getting all the answers from the Bible? You can't really make a determination until you read the whole thing. Don't read a secondary work, and then determine for yourself, once you have all the information, what the answer is. Now, how many people have done that?
Not very many.
So how do you solve a mystery? Well, in this book, the fourth way of reading the 10 thought process, the truth, is called syntopical. Syn, like synthesis. So we're reading this book synthesis, not analysis.
Yeah.
Syntopical, do a synthesis on the topic. Now, I'll give you an example of this. The word Bible it signifies all these books of the Bible, but the word Bible is never used in any of the books. So when you read something syntopically, what you do is you read all of these books, and then you look for the overarching theme that's covered in all the books. And that theme may not be explained in any book, just like the word Bible isn't used in any book, but it signifies all those books. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for the theme. Well, is the Bible one book or is it many books?
There's several books, but it comes under one title.
Right, but that's what should have thrown everybody, is why are we doing analysis? Why are we doing analysis on the Bible? Because we think it's one book. It's not one book.
But they're looking at the books like chapters, and they're not understanding the difference between a chapter and a book. So it's several books within one, under one umbrella, and in those there's several chapters within each book. So there is, and if you look at the Lord of the Rings of Harry Potter, we've gone through them all. There's magic that goes through every book, but it's not, doesn't mean that that's what it's all about. You know, it's the exact same thing when it comes to the Bible.
Right. So this book actually says, read history like a story and take a bunch of books and read them synoptically, or synthesis, which is what started this whole how I know what I know.
But you're going that way rather than this way.
Right. So how many people have read all of these books and looked for the overarching plan?
I will say two. I will say you and Ed Mabry.
Well, you cheated. You knew the answer. So what's interesting about this, before I get into this, the answer here, is that in the Bible, it says the mystery, it has not been given to unbelievers to know the mystery, but it's been given to believers. So anybody who celebrates the mystery of the Bible or says the Bible's a mystery that they can't know, they're kind of saying they're not a believer.
Yep, absolutely.
Believers are supposed to know the mystery. And what is the mystery? And you highlighted that the mystery is God's will or God's plan. If you read all 66 or more books, if you read all the books covered under the umbrella of the Bible, it paints this picture of God's will. Now, what's the analogy for how to read the Bible?
Modeling God.
The first analogy in this book, I already shared in a previous episode, was the wall analogy. So the very first analogy in this book explains how to read the Bible the right way.
Yep.
And in that I said, imagine a wall 200 miles long, 50 miles high, and you're standing in front of a tile hundreds of feet square. You're not going to understand that wall until you start backing away from it. And I said, when you get away from it, you'll see it's all tiles. The Bible's all books. I said, as you get part of the way back, there's going to come a point where you're going to get a headache because you no longer see them as tiles, but you don't see a picture. That's where we are with all these religions.
Yep.
We don't see tiles or denominations anymore, and we don't see an overarching theme. And you get a headache. And that's where most people go back to the wall. You know what? It was easier to see the thing as tiles. It was easier to look at the tile.
Yep.
If you back all the way out, there's a picture. Ed Mabry actually came up with the picture. There's a diagram that illustrates God's will that he and I have been working on. Last year, Ed and I and Joel took a group of like 60 people through this. Because if you notice, there's another part to this. You have to put the books in chronological order if you're going to read a story.
Yep.
Think about the mosaic again. You could have all the tiles and it could be doing this picture I said before of a man teaching another man to fish.
It's not in the right order.
Right. If you take all those tiles and put them in a different order, is it going to show you the picture?
No, but it's the right tiles. It's just not looking at it in the correct way. And again, when the Bible, if it's given to people in a way where it's muddled up and they've got to find out God's will for themselves, of course they're not going to be given it because it means they're not working for it. It means they're not taking the belief and, they're not just allowing the mystery to come in is what you're talking about. So if they're not in the right formation, they're never going to understand it.
Right. And the thing is that whole book shows how God brings about his will, and it shows the plan he's going for and the process he went through to get there.
Yeah.
That's what that whole book is showing. Now, you already had Ed Mabry on telling stories.
Yeah.
And he gave away the real story. In the Bible, people, if you look at the Bible, the devil isn't the villain of the story. The devil's the trickster. The devil's the person, he doesn't have a plan. And Ed did a great job of explaining the difference between a trickster and a villain. And he says, just ask yourself, if the trickster and the villain get what they want, what happens the next day? The trickster doesn't have a plan. He's just trying to disrupt everybody's plan. The villain has a plan.
Yeah.
The devil's not the villain of this work.
Well, he plants the seeds.
Right. He's the trickster. He just wants chaos. And the biggest thing he did was to convince everybody he was the villain. Because guess who the villain is? If you read that whole book, the villain is us.
Yeah, it's the person, the people, yeah.
We all have a plan. We have a plan for how this should work. Forget God's plan. We have a plan for how this should work. We're the ones hindering the plan. We're the villain of that book. And Ed shared that already in a video. The greatest trick that the devil did was not convincing people he didn't exist. It was convincing the villain that the devil was the villain. So now the villain feels justified to do what he's doing. That's really what the Bible says when you read it in order. And if you look at my story, the three pastors, the ambitious, the emergent, and the big pastor, they were tricksters. They didn't have a plan. Their plan was just not John. Just don't talk to John. And all three of them, I said, great, I'm not going to help these people. How are you going to help them? Well, I don't know, but I just don't want you to help them. They were tricksters. The villain was the bishop.
Yeah, yeah.
The bishop had a plan. He enabled all these people. He's the villain. He's really the evil one. He's the one who is trying, if we would just all not have any doctrine and sit down and be nice to each other, then we'd all get along. He had a plan. That's why he manipulated the conversation. That's why we weren't allowed to talk to certain people. He had a plan. The villain always has a plan. The trickster doesn't. So whether you're reading the Bible and people are reading it wrong, who's the villain, who's the trickster, and whether you're looking at my story, it's the same thing. But that's the thing, is if you read the Bible in chronological order as a story, it is very clear what's going on, and you don't bring anything from the outside. It is super clear, and it gives you a picture of the entire, the mosaic. Ed's actually created this mosaic. I'm working with him on this to do it, but it actually, when you look at it, you can see the entire picture.
That's amazing. And there's a lot of people now actually probably stumped as to how they step back, because most people are so charging through life with a plan, trying to make things work, and they're not allowing the will of God or the universe, whatever their belief, right? They're not willing for the will of that to be able to take over. And we know, as we've discussed in recent weeks, you and I, just without being on camera, that life can change within a second, and it changes from one person, and that can change another person's plan. And again, if you're not in that flow and you're not in that way of mind, you're always going to be stuck.
Right. So
really is, sorry to interrupt, the Bible really is the books of life. And regardless of the beliefs, it's the plan that needs to be let go of, and you've got to stop being the villain towards yourself and others.
Right. And it says that all the way through. It actually says, God is actually focused on us being focused on the intangible and the qualitative.
Yeah.
And we, the villain, have a plan of focus on the quantitative and the tangible. And that's what's hindering everything from happening. So how many people have read the book in chronological order, from not adding anything more, and just read it as a story? I can tell you that Ed and I and Joel have led a group of people last year. We've done it. I can tell you that the people have access to, we have it on a private blog. The three churches I talk about, those people have access to this. Why wouldn't I share it with everybody? Well, if you need to watch the previous 2 episodes to see why, this stuff is very uncomfortable. People have a hard time doing this without bullying, without becoming villains. You're heretical, yelling, screaming because they're wrong or how they've been looking at it. They're trying to do it. And who's the cult leader at that point? Who's the person being the villain and threatening and trying to manipulate, trying to control?
It's the person that feels threatened.
Right. These pastors have shown they're the cult leaders through how they use intimidation. Mm-hmm. So the final thing to kind of wrap this up, if you're not reading the Bible syntopically in chronological order, then you're not going to understand what's really going on in the passage that the person wants to teach. And if you remember back when I talked about making this detergent and I had modeled this region perfectly, and the answer was outside the region. That was a big moment. It was a multi-million-dollar decision to make it and ship that. And then it came back, it was right. Well, I had enough of a correlation and I understood the principles that I could predict that. That's the same thing I'm talking about, is if you understand the whole book syntopically, then you understand really what that passage and what that context means. If you don't understand that, you are in danger of being wrong. And if you're teaching this to people, you are really in danger of being wrong. If you have this syntopical approach, it's non-contradictory. So I've watched pastors for years. I love to watch pastors. They go through 3 phases. This is the 3 phases of every pastor. The first phase is they teach the Bible, and that's great. However, at a certain point, they taught this passage or context to make this point. Now they want to teach it to make a different point. Now they got a contradiction because they're not syntopical. So they stop teaching the Bible and they start teaching other people's books on the Bible.
Yeah.
This person's written a book and they start teaching that. And then that kind of runs away because, again, those are going to contradict. And then they just start teaching other people's books.
Yep.
You know, years ago when people started teaching 40 Days of Purpose, you knew that pastor was done. That book isn't about the Bible. That book is just about philosophy. And then you're teaching someone else's book. And that pastor runs out of steam, and then the pastor ends up having depression issues or retires or moves on. But that's what you can watch the life cycle of every pastor, how they do that. And I had always wanted to make this video about an old pastor and a young pastor. And the way I saw it, and to summarize the previous 2 videos and this video, here's what I would say. I imagine these 2 pastors, you know, they're in a coffee shop and this young pastor's talking to this woman at the counter, and she comes and sits down with the old pastor, and he says, you know, her 2-year-old son just died. And the old pastor said, "What did you say?" And he goes, "Well, what can you say?" And the old pastor says, "You know what? I wish there was a way that we know how to handle all these situations. I wish we had all the answers." And all of a sudden the Bible in his hands, because they're meeting to talk the Bible, glows. And he looks at it and it's now got all the answers. It's now syntopical and it's blatant. And he hands it to the young pastor, and the young pastor reads it and goes, "This is great." And the old pastor gets up and he walks out the back, the exit, and leaves depressed. The young pastor walks up to the woman because, and we talked about this with this Mel Bartholomew being a gardening heretic. This old pastor really believes I'm right, and now God's going to give me this cherry on top to give me the right answers. You know, I want all the right answers because I'm already right, but I just don't have this next answer. The reality is if you had everything right, you would have all the right answers. Yeah. The reason why you're only gotten this far is you have something contradictory. You're going to have to unlearn something. Do you really want the right answer? You're going to have to unlearn it. I don't want to unlearn it. I'd rather not help that woman and not have to say I'm wrong than go, oh, I need to unlearn something, but now I can help people. And that's the issue, is people get so uncomfortable when they have to say I was wrong. And we saw in the last episode, you know, there are people who would rather kill themselves than say I was wrong.
And I would like to just bring out a point here, which is very prevalent to this as well. people do the same in life. They don't want to unlearn because that's what the school told them, that's what the parents have taught them, that's what the education system, all this stuff has taught people. And it leads them to that 320 or 160 to 320 mindset where they can't actually take it over. And rather than unlearn what they've learned, they try and learn more, which contradicts what they already know, which then causes them to snap and take that decision, whether it's take their life or, you know, take a different path. But either way, they can unlearn and you know, let go of the stuff that they already know in order to look at life syntopically and be able to move on through that. And the Bible is life. That's where that you and I have come together, and we've got that, you know, conjunctive, and it's freedom and limitations from you and I. I'm very free the way that I've lived my life. You have limitations with the way that you've learned and the way that you've processed it all. We've come together, you know, and we do have the truth. And the truth is that everybody can live their life their way and properly.
Right. So they go towards the Lord.
Yeah.
What you're talking about is when they realize they're wrong, they go towards, I'm going to learn the stuff I know even harder. If I learn the stuff I know even harder, then you got to get away from the wall. But nobody wants to be synthesis. No one wants to take a step back. So I'm going to close it by saying this, that I said there are 3 churches that have access to this blog. In our next and final episode, I will tell you there's a 4th way to get access to this blog.
I love that. And I'm looking forward to hearing it for myself because even I don't know, which is awesome. So thank you so much. And I'm sure people are going to have a lot of questions for you from this because it's been a mind-blowing episode. And it's made me feel more fulfilled and more proud of myself as well, due to the way that I've lived my life. And I'm happy with that. So thank you for that. And that's an extra bit of validation to myself, from myself. And I will speak to you next time. Take it easy, John.
Bye.